The first winter after I retired, I still woke up at 5:40 in the morning like clockwork, heart going a little too fast, that same old jolt of I'm late running through me before my eyes were even open. I'd lie there in the dark listening to the radiator ticking, and it would take a few seconds, sometimes longer, before I remembered there was no plant to get to, no punch clock waiting on me, no supervisor named Terrence standing by the line with a clipboard wondering where I was. I was 59 years old and I still couldn't shut off 32 years of programming. That's the thing nobody tells you about leaving a life behind. Your body doesn't believe you for a long time. I spent almost my whole working life in Naperville, Illinois, about 30 miles outside Chicago, doing shift supervision at a manufacturing plant that made parts for HVAC systems. Good job, by most measures, steady, union protections, decent pension if you stuck it out, which I did, because that's what you were supposed to do. My father worked one job his whole life and retired with a gold watch nobody actually wears, and I figured that was the blueprint, so I followed it. Alarm at 5:15, coffee in the truck, radio traffic report, same exit off 88, same parking spot, same guys clocking in around me who I'd known for 2 decades and still, if I'm honest, barely knew. Somewhere around 56, 57, I started noticing that my life had quietly turned into upkeep. Maintaining the house, maintaining the cars, maintaining the gutters, the furnace, the health insurance paperwork, the 401k rebalancing I didn't understand and paid somebody else to handle. Even Saturdays stopped feeling like rest, because Sunday was always sitting there at the other end of it, waiting to remind you Monday was coming. I wasn't depressed, not the clinical kind anyway. I still laughed at Denise's jokes, still went to my grandson's baseball games, still had a beer with the guys from the plant on Fridays. But I remember standing in my kitchen one January night during an ice storm, watching the news talk about pension shortfalls and layoffs at another plant across the state, and having a thought that scared me more than it should have. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt calm, not happy. Calm. Those aren't the same thing, and I don't think I understood that until I didn't have it anymore. Nothing was wrong with my life on paper. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this sounds otherwise. I wasn't in debt. I had decent savings, a pension coming, Social Security not too far off. My kids were grown. Tyler was 31 by then, working in Indianapolis, and Brooke was 28 and had just had her first baby. I should have felt like I'd made it through the hard part. Instead, I just felt worn down in a way I couldn't point to. Like life had turned into something heavy I'd been carrying around so long I'd stopped noticing the weight. It started, honestly, because I was up too late on YouTube. Denise had already gone to bed and I was sitting in the recliner with the TV muted, phone in my hand, falling down one of those algorithm holes. Guy who quit his corporate job and moved to a small town in the mountains, somewhere in West Virginia, filming himself splitting firewood and talking to his neighbors on the porch. Then another one, similar, a woman who'd left Phoenix for some little town in the Virginia hills, showing her mornings, walking to the general store, sitting on a bench outside the post office talking to somebody for 20 minutes about nothing. It wasn't the scenery that got me, though the mountains were something, it was the pace. Nobody in those videos looked like they were sprinting through their own life the way everybody I knew back home seemed to be, myself included. At first, I figured it was all curated nonsense, the way everything online is a little bit fake. But the more of these I watched, especially the boring ones, the ones where somebody was just walking down Main Street of some place with 400 people in it, saying hello to everybody by name, the more I started wondering what that would actually feel like. Not the vacation version, the daily life version. That question sat in my head for almost 2 years before I did anything about it. I remember one night in particular. I'd had one of those microwave dinners because Denise was visiting her sister in Ohio for the week, and I was sitting there with the tray on the little folding table, watching the steam come off it, half frozen in the middle, even after the full 7 minutes, snow coming down outside the window. Dark by 4:45 in the afternoon like it gets in Illinois in January. I remember looking around that kitchen, nice kitchen, we'd redone it a few years before, granite counters, the whole thing, and asking myself, not dramatically, just honestly, is this it? Wake up, go to work, come home, eat something out of a box, wait for the weekend, repeat until your body gives out. That thought didn't feel like sadness exactly. It felt more like waking up in the middle of your own life and realizing you'd been sleepwalking through most of it. I want to say something plainly because people online always turn this into a money story, and it wasn't. I wasn't broke. I wasn't desperate. I'd done fine for myself. I'd missed birthdays because of overtime, worked every 4th of July for a decade straight because the extra pay mattered when the kids were young, taken the safe path at every fork because that's what you do when you've got a mortgage and 2 kids and a wife counting on you. But somewhere along the way I'd built a stable life and forgotten to actually live inside it. That's why those videos got under my skin the way they did. It wasn't really about small towns, not at first. It started as background noise. Somebody walking through a farmer's market in some little Appalachian town. Somebody sitting on a tailgate talking to a neighbor for half an hour about absolutely nothing. Rain hitting a tin porch roof. A dog sleeping in the middle of a gravel road like it owned the place. Ordinary stuff. But every person in those videos looked lighter somehow, like life wasn't squeezing the air out of them every single day, the way it felt like it was squeezing it out of me. I told myself for a long time it was just vacation energy. The way people go to a cabin for a weekend and think they could live like that forever. But the more I watched, the more I noticed these weren't wealthy people showing off. Half the houses looked like they needed work. Old trucks, window units instead of central air. But the people themselves seemed calmer than anybody I actually knew. There was one video that stuck with me for months. This older guy, maybe 70, sitting on a bench outside a hardware store, eating a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, while 2 kids threw a football in the street behind him, and somebody's radio played bluegrass from an open garage door. Nothing was happening. That's what got me. Nobody in that scene was trying to impress anybody. Nobody cared what truck he drove or what he used to do for a living. He just looked at peace, watching his little town move around him. Then one morning in February, I was out scraping ice off my windshield before a doctor's appointment. My hands aching so bad from the cold, I actually started laughing out loud, standing there alone in my driveway at 6 a.m. Not because anything was funny, because it suddenly hit me, clear as anything. I really do not want to spend whatever years I have left doing this. That was the moment the idea stopped being a fantasy and started feeling like something I might actually do. I started researching quietly after that. Property values in small towns 2-3 hours from any city. Cost of living. What healthcare access actually looked like outside a metro area. Because I wasn't naive about that part. I'd read enough forums to know rural healthcare has real gaps, and that scared me some, I won't pretend it didn't. I read everything. Some people online made small-town life sound like paradise, neighbors who'd give you the shirt off their back. Other people made it sound like isolation and gossip and nothing to do, and towns dying a slow economic death. I saw all of it, and even the bad stuff didn't talk me out of it, because I think somewhere underneath, this had stopped being about any particular town. It had become about wanting my life to feel different before I got too old to change it. I didn't tell anybody for almost a year. That's the part that sounds strange looking back. But for months, this whole thing just lived quietly in my head, while I kept showing up to the plant every day, acting like nothing had changed. Sitting through production meetings about quarterly numbers, while part of my brain was thinking about a town I'd never seen called Cedar Hollow, tucked into the Blue Ridge in Virginia. A name I'd found on some real estate site at 2 in the morning. I finally told my brother-in-law, Wesley, one night when we were out at the bar we always went to for Bears games. He about choked on his wings. "Cedar Hollow, Virginia?" he said. Like I'd told him I was joining a cult. Why in the hell would you want to live in the mountains with 400 people and one stoplight? And honestly, I didn't have a clean answer for him. It wasn't the scenery. It wasn't cheap land, though that helped. It wasn't running from anything specific. I just knew that every time I watched those videos, I felt calmer than I did sitting in my own house. And that's a strange thing to admit when you're 59 years old and you've lived your whole life within 60 miles of where you were born. Most people thought I was going through some kind of phase. Denise did too, at first, though she was gentler about it than Wesley. She'd grown up not far from where we lived, had her whole family. Her sister, her mother before she passed, her book club, her garden club, 30 years of roots in one place. When I finally worked up the nerve to really talk to her about it, really lay it out, she didn't say no exactly. She said she needed time. She said she wasn't ready to leave her mother's old church, her sister down the road, the life she'd built, and I understood that. I did. But something in me had already started moving toward this thing, whether she was ready or not, and that created a distance between us I didn't know how to close yet. We agreed eventually that I'd go first, scout it out, buy something small, see if it was real or just a fantasy I'd built up in my head watching too much YouTube at midnight. She'd stay in Naperville near Brooke and the baby, and we'd see. I remember how strange that sounded saying it out loud to Tyler on the phone. Your mother and I are living apart for a while. And how he went quiet before saying, Dad, are you guys okay? We were. We are. But I won't pretend that first year wasn't its own kind of hard, on top of everything else. 3 months after that conversation, I loaded up my truck with about half of what I owned and drove 12 hours east and south, watching the flat Illinois farmland give way to Indiana, then Ohio, then somewhere around the West Virginia border. The land started folding up into hills, and by the time I hit the Virginia mountains, my ears were popping from the elevation, and my chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with altitude. I kept thinking, the whole drive, what am I doing? I'm 59 years old. I have a pension and a paid-off house and grandkids 20 minutes away, and I'm driving toward a town I've seen exactly twice, both times through a phone screen. The first few days in Cedar Hollow did not feel like the videos. Nobody warns you about that part. I'd rented a little cabin outside town while I looked for something to buy, and the quiet nearly drove me out of my mind the first night. Not peaceful quiet, unfamiliar quiet, the kind where every sound stands out, an owl somewhere, wind moving through trees I didn't have names for yet, no traffic hum in the background the way there always was back home, even at 2 a.m. I lay there thinking I'd made an enormous mistake, and the second thing that hit me was how visible I felt. Naperville had 18,000 people, and I could go a week without really talking to anybody outside my own house. Cedar Hollow had maybe 400, and within 2 days, 3 different people at the general store already knew my name, knew I was the guy who bought, or was thinking about buying, the old Pruitt place off Route 9, knew I was from Illinois, and were not shy about asking me anything they wanted to know. If I'd left that first week, I probably would have told everybody back home the exact same thing most people say when a place doesn't fit them right away. Too quiet, too nosy, too different. But then small things started happening. And those small things are the whole reason I stayed. The first one was a diner on Main Street called Wanda's, though I didn't know that was her name yet. 1 booth, 6 stools at the counter, a pie case that had clearly been there since the Nixon administration. I went in because I was tired and didn't know where else to eat, and the menu on the wall had about 9 things on it, half of which I didn't recognize. Wanda, 60-something, apron, hair pinned up, came over, and instead of getting impatient when I admitted I didn't know what half of it was, she just pulled a stool around to my side of the counter and went through it item by item like she had nowhere else on earth to be. This one's like a Reuben, but we do it with our own coleslaw. This one you want with the biscuits, trust me. Try this, you'll like it, and if you don't, I'll make you something else. No rushing, no impatience, just this easy, unhurried attention. I remember sitting there eating a plate of biscuits and gravy with fried apples on the side, and thinking about how back home almost every interaction I had felt transactional by that point in my life. Self-checkout at the grocery store. Drive-through windows where you never see a face. People on their phones even while you were talking to them. But here, strangers still actually talk to each other. That meal, nothing fancy, maybe $8, turned out to be one of the best I'd had in years. Not because of the food exactly, but because for the first time in a long time I wasn't rushing through it. That became something I noticed everywhere after that. People sat outside the hardware store, outside the church on Wednesday nights, on tailgates in the gravel lot behind the feed store, just talking, for what felt to me like an unreasonable amount of time. Back in Naperville, everybody was always halfway leaving, even while they were standing right in front of you, checking a watch, glancing at a phone, one foot already pointed toward the next thing. Here, a quick stop for gas at Buddy's station could turn into 45 minutes of him telling me about his knee replacement and asking after my grandkids like he'd known them his whole life. At first, honestly, it made me uncomfortable. I remember sitting on the tailgate of my truck one evening outside the general store, having a beer I'd bought inside, and feeling almost guilty about it. Guilty for doing nothing, guilty for not accomplishing something. That's how conditioned I was after 32 years of shift work. Part of me kept thinking I should be fixing the porch railing or answering emails I no longer had. Instead, I just sat there watching a couple of dogs wander down the middle of the road while somebody's radio played an old George Jones song from an open truck window. And slowly, over weeks, that guilty feeling started to fade. The other thing that surprised me was how quickly people noticed me. Not in some celebrity way, just in the way that small places actually see each other. The woman at the post office remembered my name after the second visit. Buddy at the gas station started asking if I was settling in okay. I'd lived in the same subdivision in Naperville for 19 years and could count on one hand the neighbors whose last names I knew. Here, people I'd met once were already calling me by name, asking if I'd eaten, telling me to come by if I needed anything fixed. That messed with me a little emotionally, if I'm being honest, because I hadn't realized how invisible I'd started feeling back home, until people here started treating me like I mattered simply by existing among them. And it wasn't about money, though I want to say plainly that the money mattered too, because people online always want to make it only about that, or pretend it isn't a factor at all. And both of those are lies. I'd sold the house in Naperville. Denise and I agreed on that eventually, that we'd both start fresh. And what that money bought me in Cedar Hollow was almost embarrassing by comparison. 3 acres and a farmhouse with a wraparound porch for less than half what our old place had sold for. Property taxes I could pay from a month of my pension without blinking. But the biggest difference wasn't the math. It was how the days felt. I'd wake up and hear somebody's rooster 3 properties over, hear a truck starting up on gravel, and there was this sense that life was happening around me, instead of everybody hiding behind their own garage doors. One morning, maybe 3 weeks in, I walked down to get coffee at Earl's place. A little coffee stand that used to be somebody's front porch before Earl turned it into a business. And there was an old man sitting outside on a bench, nodding at everybody who walked by. Kids on their way to the school bus stop, a construction crew heading to a job, an old woman with a cane. Same little smile and nod for every single one of them, like he was genuinely glad each of them existed. I remember thinking, when's the last time I saw anybody do that back home? Years, probably. Longer. I don't want to make this sound easier than it was, because it wasn't easier. Cedar Hollow didn't solve my problems the way people online love to pretend a new zip code will. I still worried about money some days. I still missed my kids terribly, missed Denise more than I let on to anybody. There were stretches where the internet was so slow I couldn't get through a video call without it freezing. There was a stomach bug that first spring that had me curled up on the bathroom floor of that farmhouse, convinced I might actually die there alone. 40 minutes from the nearest urgent care. There were moments I seriously questioned the whole decision. But even on the hard days, I felt more alive than I had back in Naperville. And that's a strange thing to explain to somebody who hasn't lived it. I remember one night in March, maybe 2 months after I'd moved in, we got hit with an ice storm that knocked the power out across 3 counties. I was sitting there with a flashlight trying to get a signal on my phone when everything just went dark and silent. No hum of the fridge, no furnace kicking on, nothing. Back in Naperville, something like that would have had me on the phone with ComEd within 5 minutes, irritated, checking the outage map obsessively. Instead, because the house got cold fast without the furnace, I bundled up and walked outside, and found half my little stretch of road already gathered around a fire pit at Gordon's place next door. Gordon, who I barely knew, passed a wave from the mailbox, with a couple other neighbors, somebody's propane stove going, a big pot of something cooking. Gordon waved me over like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Next thing I knew, I was sitting on an overturned bucket, eating chili out of a paper bowl, listening to these people who'd lived here their whole lives trade stories about worse storms, worse winters, somebody's cousin who once got snowed in for 11 days back in the 80s. Nobody panicked. Nobody complained much. It was just life, continuing a different way for a while. I remember sitting there realizing I hadn't thought about my old job once that whole evening. No inbox to check, no production numbers running through my head. Just people, sitting around a fire because there wasn't much else to do, and it felt good. Simple, but good. That was the strange thing about Cedar Hollow. A lot of the comforts I thought I couldn't live without started mattering less over time. Not overnight. I still complained. I still got frustrated when the internet cut out, or when some form I needed from the county took 3 trips to the courthouse to sort out. But little by little I stopped needing everything to feel perfectly controlled all the time, and that loosened something in me I didn't know had been clenched for years. The lonely stretches were real too, and I think it's dishonest when people leave that part out. My first Thanksgiving there, Denise had a work conflict with her sister's family, and Tyler and Brooke were both tied up with their in-laws, and I found myself alone in that farmhouse on a holiday for the first time in my adult life. I'd made a small turkey breast just for myself, and it sat there on the counter looking almost comical, this whole bird's worth of effort for one plate. I called Denise that afternoon and tried to sound fine, tried not to let my voice give away how far away everybody I loved suddenly felt. After we hung up, I walked out onto the porch because I couldn't sit in that quiet kitchen anymore, and up and down the road I could see lights on in every house, cars in every driveway, families gathered. And for a few minutes I really questioned everything. Maybe I'd gotten carried away chasing some idea that didn't actually include the people who mattered most. Then there was a knock at my door. It was Ruthie, from 2 houses down, a widow in her 70s who I'd talked to maybe 4 times total since moving in. She was holding a plate covered in foil, still warm. "Figured you might not have people close by today," she said, like it was nothing at all. I tried to tell her she didn't have to do that, and she looked at me like I'd said something slightly ridiculous. "Nobody eats alone on Thanksgiving around here if I've got anything to say about it," she said, and then she just stood there until I invited her in, and we ended up sitting at my kitchen table for 2 hours, eating turkey and her homemade rolls, her telling me about her late husband and this valley, and 40 years of harvest suppers at the church, me telling her about Naperville and Denise and the grandbaby I hadn't held in 3 months. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't anything, really. But that was the night something shifted in me. Not the mountains, not the porch, not the cheap property taxes. That was the moment I stopped feeling like somebody just passing through Cedar Hollow and started feeling like I actually lived there. After that, I started building routines without really trying to. Every morning, the walk down to Earl's for coffee. After a while, he stopped asking what I wanted and just started making it the second he saw my truck pull in. Sometimes I'd sit on that converted porch for an hour, watching the town wake up, and nobody ever rushed me along. Back home, everything had felt timed. Get your coffee. Move along, next customer. Here, a 5-minute errand at the feed store could turn into 40 minutes talking about weather or high school football or somebody's nephew who'd moved out to Denver for work. And somewhere in those first months I noticed I was smiling more. Not performing it, actually smiling. I wasn't carrying that tightness in my chest the way I had for years, without even realizing it was there. There were still hard days, plenty of them. The paperwork for the county land transfer took 4 separate trips to the courthouse because they kept wanting a different document each time. I got frustrated more than once, standing in some office sweating through my shirt, thinking, why is this taking so long? Back in Illinois, at least I understood the systems I was frustrated with. Here I was still learning which office handled what. Still getting directions that involved somebody's barn as a landmark instead of a street address. One afternoon I got caught in a sudden downpour, walking back from the hardware store and ducked under the awning of the feed store with 5 or 6 other people waiting it out. Within minutes everybody was talking. Not on their phones, actually talking. An older fellow asked where I was from. Another one joked that I must have brought that Illinois weather with me. A kid asked if it snowed as much up north as people said. We stood there almost half an hour while the rain came down, and by the time it let up I felt like I'd spent the afternoon with friends I'd never officially met before. That kind of thing kept happening, over and over, until eventually I stopped feeling like a visitor and started feeling rooted. I'd originally told Denise I'd give it 6 months, maybe a year, just long enough to figure out if this was real or some midlife notion I needed to get out of my system before coming home for good. But the months kept passing, and I found I didn't want to leave. Back in Naperville, I used to count things constantly. Years until full pension, vacation days, weekends. Here I just stopped counting. Life started feeling present in a way I couldn't have explained to my younger self. The first time I drove back to Naperville to visit, about 10 months in, I expected it to feel like coming home, comfortable, familiar, slipping right back into my old life. Instead, it felt strange almost immediately. The traffic on 88 felt louder than I remembered, not just noisy, tense. Everybody moving fast, nobody making eye contact, a guy 2 cars over laying on his horn like his whole day depended on the light changing half a second sooner. I stood in line at a Starbucks and watched a man get genuinely furious because they'd gotten his order wrong, and I remember thinking, I used to be exactly like that, and maybe not so long ago either. The town looked exactly the same. Same strip malls, same restaurants, same sports bar Wesley and I used to go to, but I didn't feel the same moving through it. Even lunch with old coworkers turned, within 10 minutes, into everybody talking about layoffs and mortgage rates and how expensive everything had gotten. And I wasn't judging them, because I used to sound just like that. But after almost a year of a slower pace, it hit me how much anxiety people carry around without noticing it's even there. One afternoon during that visit, I went into the grocery store to grab something for Denise and found myself standing in the cereal aisle for what felt like 2 full minutes, staring at 40 different kinds of the same basic thing. Bright lights overhead, carts piled high with stuff nobody really needed, and I felt exhausted just standing there. That's when it really landed for me. I hadn't missed my old life nearly as much as I thought I would. I missed people. That's different. I missed Tyler and Brooke and the grandbaby and my old buddies from the plant. I didn't miss the pace. I didn't miss the pressure. I didn't miss constantly feeling like I was one step behind my own life. The moment that actually surprised me was crossing back into Virginia on the return drive, watching those hills rise up out of the flatland again, and feeling something in my chest ease that I hadn't even known was tight. A place that had felt so foreign to me 8 months earlier now felt like coming home. I remember pulling into the driveway of that farmhouse, hearing an owl somewhere, and Gordon's dog barking 2 properties over, and thinking, I'm back, not visiting, back. That was probably the moment I finally admitted to myself this wasn't temporary anymore. I want to be honest about something because people online love to turn a move like this into a fantasy where every single day becomes peaceful and meaningful and simple. That's not real life. There were still days the isolation got to me. Still days I sat on that porch, missing my family so bad it physically hurt. Healthcare is the thing that worries me most looking forward. The nearest hospital with a real emergency room is 40 minutes away, and there's an understanding sitting in the back of my mind that if something serious ever happened to me out here, especially as I get older, I'd need a plan for that, not just faith that it'll work out. That reality never fully leaves you, and I think anybody considering something like this owes it to themselves to think it through with clear eyes instead of a highlight reel. And there was still the matter of Denise. For months we existed in this strange in-between, her in Naperville near her sister and the grandbaby, me down here building a life she hadn't fully signed on to yet. I won't pretend that wasn't its own kind of hard on our marriage, but she came to visit that spring, meant to stay a week, and ended up staying 3. I watched her soften the same way I had. Watched her get pulled into a conversation with Ruthie on my porch that lasted 2 hours. Watched her come back from Juan's diner, saying she'd made a friend already. Watched her stand out on that porch. One evening after a thunderstorm rolled through and just breathe, really breathe, in a way I hadn't seen her do in years. She went back to Illinois to handle the practical things. The house closing, saying her goodbyes properly to her mother's church, to her sister. But she came back that August for good, and the day her moving truck pulled up the road, half the neighbors I'd come to know showed up without being asked, carrying boxes, and Ruthie had a casserole in the oven before Denise had even unpacked her first bag. These days my life would probably look small to somebody watching from the outside. I wake up early, most mornings before the alarm even needs to go off, because the light comes up over those mountains and the whole valley starts stirring around me. I walk down to Earl's for coffee. I sit on the porch some evenings with Denise and don't feel the need to fill the silence with anything. I know my neighbors' names, their kids' names, half their dogs' names. My world got smaller when I left Naperville. Fewer stores, fewer choices, slower internet, a whole lot less convenience. But my life somehow got bigger inside that smaller space. Back home I had everything at my fingertips and most days still felt repetitive and blurry. Wake up, work, recover, repeat. Here my routine is about as simple as it gets, and somehow it feels like more, not less. I think that's the real reason people my age end up moving somewhere like this, and it's rarely about hating where they came from, or chasing some rural fantasy, or thinking a small town is somehow purer than a city. I think a lot of us are just tired. Tired of feeling rushed, tired of feeling unseen, tired of a life that had turned into something we managed instead of something we actually lived inside of. That's what happened to me. Cedar Hollow, for all its slow internet and long drives to the hospital and nosy questions at the general store, gave me something I honestly didn't think I was going to find again at this stage of my life. It gave me room to breathe. These mornings, when I wake up early and hear a rooster somewhere down the road, or Gordon's truck starting up on the gravel, or rain coming across the ridge before the sun's even fully up, I don't feel that old panic anymore, the one that used to hit me the second my eyes opened. I don't feel behind. I don't feel like I'm racing through whatever years I've got left. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm actually inside my own life, instead of watching it go by from somewhere just outside it. And at this age, with the people I love finally around me again, that feels like more than enough.